Thank you. We make decisions in our lives every day. And this trial that we're here for today is about a decision that the defendant, Bonnie Hicks, made on November 29th, 2009. That decision was to get behind the wheel of her car and drive while she was feeling the effects of alcohol. Bonnie Hicks was driving her car on Trapello Road, a public way in the city of Waltham. She was driving westbound, coming up to the intersection of Smith Street. And simultaneously, as she was coming up to that intersection, John Causland entered the roadway. John Causland entered the roadway where there's a crosswalk. What else is there at that intersection? There's a gas station. There's a church. There's streetlights. And it was 6:20 in the morning. John Causland was on his way to work that morning. He was on his way to work at the Waltham, at a nursing home in Waltham, which was right at that intersection, which was on one of the corners of that intersection. And as he was crossing that roadway, a wide roadway, you'll hear that that roadway is over 69 feet wide, John Causland was struck. He was struck by Bonnie Hicks's car. He was struck on the right, by the right side, the right front side of her car. He made it about 65 feet across the roadway, of that 69-foot roadway. John Causland, at that point, was unconscious, and he was taken to the hospital. And you'll hear from John, you'll hear from his father, Manny, about his hospital stays and where he was and how long he was there. The Waltham police were called. One of the people who called the Waltham police was the defendant herself. And you'll hear that 911 call. And I'll ask you to listen to that 911 call. Listen to it carefully. There was also another witness who you will hear from. Her name's Monica LeBlanc. And she was sitting at that intersection. She was sitting at a red light on Smith Street at the intersection of Trapello Road. And she saw that car crash. And she's going to tell you what she saw. After the crash, the Waltham police were called. And the Waltham police responded to that scene. You'll hear from Officer Gary Bell. You'll hear what he saw when he first arrived. And then you're going to hear from Officer Don Doherty. Officer Doherty arrived on scene, and you're going to hear that Officer Doherty went over to the defendant's car, and that she was sitting in the driver's side of her car, and that Officer Doherty had some conversation with her. And you'll hear about the observations that Officer Doherty made of the defendant at that time. And I expect that he will testify that she had a strong odor of alcohol coming from her, that she had red and bloodshot glassy eyes. And she had some conversation with Officer Doherty. Officer Doherty asked the defendant if she'd been drinking. And she said she'd been drinking earlier that night. And Officer Doherty asked when and where, and how much. And the defendant said that she had had 4 glasses of wine earlier in the night. And the officer asked, well, if the defendant knew what time it was now when this crash happened. And I expect that he'll say that she stared at him with a blank stare and didn't respond to that question. And Officer Doherty then asked the defendant to take some what are called field sobriety tests. And Officer Doherty will explain to you what a field sobriety test is and what he's looking for when he asks somebody to perform a field sobriety test. And I expect that Officer Doherty will tell you that the defendant took 3 field sobriety tests and that she did not perform well on any of those tests. That she took a finger-to-nose test, a 9-step walk-and-turn test, and a 1-leg stand test. And at the conclusion of those tests, Officer Doherty formed the opinion that the defendant was operating her motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, and she was placed under arrest. She was brought back to the Waltham Police Station, and she was booked at the Waltham Police Station by Sergeant Robert Scarpone. And Sergeant Scarpone will testify, and he'll testify about the observations he made of the defendant, that she had a strong odor of alcohol coming from her, about her responses to the questions. And then you're going to get to see a video of the defendant. You're going to get to watch the defendant during that booking process. That booking was fully videotaped. And finally, you'll also hear from Officer Steve Clark. Officer Clark is somebody who's trained in accident reconstruction. And he's going to testify about the roadway and observations. He'll testify that he went out there right after that crash occurred, that measurements were taken, observations were made of that roadway, and calculations were made. And I expect that he will testify that this defendant, Bonnie Hicks, should have been able to see John Causland in that roadway, and that she should have been able to stop her car, and that she should have been able to stop her car 60 feet before impact. Members of the jury, we make decisions every day. And I suggest the evidence will show that Bonnie Hicks made the decision to drive her car while under the influence of alcohol. I'll have a chance to speak to you at the end of this trial, and I will be asking that you return verdicts of guilty. Thank you.